Yes! That music can mean only one of two things. Either you're listening to the soundtrack to the god-awful American adaptation of Godzilla, or it's time for the first ever episode of RiC and Wrestling, the online wrestling show for the thinking man. Steve Austin likes to dedicate his podcast to the working man, or this one's for you, the thinking man, the thinking fan. And that's exactly why I decided to start this podcast, because wrestling gives you a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. You know, it can be frustrating being a fan sometimes, and sometimes you just gotta get it off your chest, and God knows, the world needs podcasts. Known in some circles as Violent Rick, I am Rick David, and now will be your Huckleberry for the next
41 minutes and 8 seconds.
Now this is a brand new show on a brand new channel, so I'm really looking for your feedback on this. If you like it, let me know that you like it. Give it a thumbs up, maybe leave a comment. Hey, if you really like it, then you can always share it or tell a friend. Now, here on RiC and Wrestling, we're not going to be going through everything that happened on every show, because there are plenty of good podcasts that can give you just that if that's what you're looking for. So instead, we're going to be going in depth on issues that are pertinent to what's going on right now in the WWE. And just the WWE, because honestly, I've been an on-off TNA fan over the years, and right now I just don't have the heart to get back into it. So, we're going to take it topic by topic, and I'm going to break these videos up. But if you do want to listen to it all in one go, I'm also going to upload the whole show. The whole effing show, if you will. So let's jump right into it. The first topic I want to talk about is shades of grey in wrestling. That is ambiguous faces and heels. Now, professional wrestling, also known as sports entertainment, which is exactly the same thing, by the way, despite the common distinction, is a completely unique art form, unique drama and storytelling device. And because of this, some things work in wrestling that don't work elsewhere, in literature and film. And likewise, some things work in literature and film, but they just don't work in wrestling. And Shades of Grey is one of those. So what exactly do I mean by Shades of Grey? Well, I'm sure you all know faces and heels, good guys, bad guys, heroes and villains. It's a dichotomy as old as mankind itself. And there's a simple reason why wrestling has always used this balance between good and evil. Because wrestling, unlike literature, unlike film, is all about two sides clashing, two sides fighting, and about the audience being invested in that fight. About them being vocal, whether they're supporting one guy, booing the other guy. That is an essential ingredient in wrestling. You know, in film, in books, it's about telling a compelling story with compelling characters. But it's not just that simple, one guy versus the other guy, or one team of guys versus another team of guys or girls. But in wrestling, that is what it all comes down to. You can have these complex stories going on to build up to the matches, but it's all window dressing for that one confrontation, that clash between two people who have a dispute that they're going to settle in a fight. Now, as we all know, crowd reaction is everything in wrestling. If the crowd is dead, it's hard to get into a match. And if the crowd is booing everything that happens in a match, then, well, that might be entertaining to watch, but it certainly doesn't facilitate the enjoyment of the actual competition that's going on in the ring. So, the easiest way of making fans get into a match to give the right reaction is for them to have one person that they want to root for and another person that they want to root against. Now, sometimes you do have face versus face matches, but for them to be truly successful, it really takes two superstars, two hugely popular stars that are so popular that you're going to have half the crowd rooting for one, half the crowd rooting for the other, you know, like the Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior. Another way it can work is if both the babyface wrestlers are excellent wrestlers, excellent performers, and so it becomes more of just a wrestling clinic, mostly for the fans, for their entertainment, I suppose, and for competition's sake. Let's say it's CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, and they're both faces, and the crowd is loving it because it's fantastic wrestling, and they're getting to see who's gonna be the victor on this night. And this can work as the exception that proves the rule. But even then, I say it only goes so far, because when you're watching a wrestling match like that and you're lapping it up, but you're sort of happy whatever happens. You know, you're just happy to see these guys do what they do, and it's a feel-good match, and I can enjoy that. But if that's all we had in wrestling, we'd be missing out on the most dramatic matches, the most dramatic storytelling, because that requires a protagonist and an antagonist. And bear in mind, you can have a babyface versus babyface match where you basically have a de facto heel and a de facto face emerge. If you look at the WrestleMania 28 Triple H versus The Undertaker with Shawn Michaels as the guest referee in a Hell in a Cell, Triple H became the de facto heel, Undertaker the face. So you could still have that, the higher drama of a face versus heel, even though they were both really face wrestlers at the time. And that is not what I mean when I say shades of grey. When I say shades of grey, I mean wrestlers that aren't consistently presented as somebody to root for or to root against. And if you've been watching the WWE since SummerSlam of 2013, then you'll know what I'm talking about when I say Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, the Authority. Now, like a lot of you listening, I'm sure, I had fond memories of Vince McMahon's evil corporation. And so I thought, this is what we're going to be getting with Daniel Bryan. It's going to be him versus the evil machine. But instead what we got was a machine that was sometimes evil, but then sometimes benevolent. Sometimes they'd be screwing over Daniel Bryan, and sometimes they'd be screwing over their handpicked champion Randy Orton. Sometimes they'd be doing absolutely despicable things. They'd be humiliating the Big Show, bullying the man, Stephanie McMahon making the guy cry on television. Threatening him, we're gonna fire you, you're gonna lose your house, all of this stuff. Terrible things. But then maybe a few segments later, they'd be trying to embarrass Vicky Guerrero, the heel, deafening boos for Vicky Guerrero, and there they are, trying to embarrass her. And then obviously the crowd, they cheer for them in that segment, or they don't really know whether they should cheer for them. And that is the heart of the problem. Because what's the sound of the response to a character that people are rooting for? They're cheering, they're going wild, they're making a lot of noise. What's the response for a character that is despised? They're booing them, they're heckling them, they're making a lot of noise. What's the response for a character that is now trying to get one over on another character you dislike, even though you don't like them either? It's people talking amongst themselves. Maybe half of the crowd is booing a bit, half the crowd is cheering a bit. It's a mess. It doesn't come across well on TV, and it just doesn't tell a story. Nobody knows what they're supposed to be thinking, and so they don't feel anything. And for a while, I would rationalize it as, well, in real life, bad people aren't bad all the time. They're not consistently bad. Or maybe they don't want to present themselves as completely evil. They want people to think that they're nice guys, so they will be disingenuously doing nice things. But while that might work for a book or for a film, it doesn't work in wrestling. And it doesn't work in wrestling because unlike in books or films, in wrestling your audience is right there, and after everything that you say or do, they have to react. So let's look at an example. Let's say that Triple H is doing one of these disingenuous nice things. So let's say he's standing there in the ring and he says, last week or last night at the pay-per-view, the Rhodes brothers were screwed out of their titles, so tonight we're going to give them a title shot, tonight on Raw. Obviously the crowd's got to cheer that because they like the Rhodes brothers and it seems like he's doing the right thing. Now, even if those fans know that he's not really being nice, maybe he's setting them up for some other kind of injustice, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to boo because we know that you're not genuine? So they're going to boo when he says, we're going to give you what you want. It just doesn't work. There's no real reaction for any of these things. And then you got the situations when they're not even announcing decisions. They're just doing their babyface routines. I mean, even early into this Authority storyline, Triple H would come out and he'd still do his, are you ready? I said, oh, yeah. And I mean, the crowd's gonna do it. Everybody loves a catchphrase. Everybody loves when they get to chant along with things. And I was thinking, why the hell is he doing this? When he's building up all of this seething resentment, why is he then having the crowd join in? And the most egregious example of this is, of course, the New Age Outlaws. So they come back and they're baby faces, they're legacy stars, they're doing their nostalgia run, and that's fine. I'm into that. I'm enjoying that. But then they turn heel on CM Punk. Or do they turn heel? I mean, they double cross the guy and they align themselves with the Authority, who, even though they sometimes act like baby faces, it's clear that the crowd doesn't like them. So, okay, they've turned heel, but then the next time you see them, they're still doing Road Dogg's still coming to the ring with a microphone, doing his classic routine with the crowd participation. And everybody loves that. Of course they're going to join in. But, I mean, I've said already about how I think it just destroys the narrative. But what actually pissed me off about this is they're currently feuding with the Usos. Now, the Usos over the past years have built up this crowd support. The crowd are firmly behind them. But then last week on Raw, they had the New Age Outlaws. They're standing in the ring, and before they do their introduction on the microphone, they make some snide comment to the Usos. Clear off out the ring. Let the veterans do what they do, or something like that. And the Usos, they oblige at first. Seemingly, they exit the ring, and then as the Road Dogg's getting into his routine and the crowd is joining in, the Usos jump them. And the Usos jump them, stop the crowd from being able to do what they were enjoying doing, and so naturally, the crowd turns on them and boos them. So you spent all of these years getting the crowd to be in favour of the Usos, and then, because of your foolish booking, you have the crowd turn on them and support the New Age Outlaws. And that's a shame, because I think the New Age Outlaws could be great today if they just played heels all the time, just consistently got the crowd to dislike them and stayed that way. Didn't do anything when they're like mugging for cheers or anything like that. Just stayed as heels. Because Road Dogg is still witty, he's still really sharp. And Billy Gunn, I think he's easy to dislike. He's got that sort of arrogance about him. I think they could be great. I think they could have had a fantastic feud with the Rhodes brothers. But instead, we got Shades of Grey. I mean, look back at some of the greatest villains in wrestling. Of my years of watching wrestling, which is about 24 years, I've got to say Mr. McMahon, the evil boss, is probably my favourite wrestling villain. But look how he portrayed himself. He was evil. He was universally despised. He didn't sometimes come out and stack the deck against Austin, but then other times come out and stack the deck against his own corporation. Sometimes come out cheerleading for the baby faces, giving the people what they want, doing some sort of catchphrase routine so that the crowd could all join in. If he'd have done that, it wouldn't have worked as well as it did. He wouldn't have been universally despised. He'd have had some people would like to cheer, or some people thought, I don't know, he's not so bad. Sometimes he does the right thing. No. He was evil. He was always evil. He was the villain and Austin was our hero. People can say Austin was a tool in a character. Well, maybe he was at first before they really embraced him as a top star. But once he became a top star, he was a face. And because a babyface doesn't have to be a certain way. They don't have to be, smiling, sucking up to the fans. They don't have to be Mr. Nice Guy. They just have to be the guy that you root for. When Austin was in a match, when Austin was in a feud, it was clear he's the guy you're supposed to be behind, not the other guy. That's what made him the face and the other guy the heel. Now, to wrap this all up, I can't remember if it was Jim Cornette or Jim Ross who came up with this hypothetical. I've heard it a few times. But he said, imagine you come across two guys having a fight. And one guy, he's a burly big bastard. He's built, he looks tough, he looks like he's been in a lot of fights. But the other guy, he's a weedy little fucker. And he's scrawny, and he looks like he doesn't stand a chance. And he's getting battered. He's getting destroyed. But then against all odds, the little guy seems to be mounting a comeback. It looks like he just might be able to pull off a minor miracle and turn this thing around. Well, naturally, you're rooting for the underdog. It's just sort of part of our psyche. We know who we're rooting for. But what if you knew all along that the big guy was fighting the little guy because the little guy had been cheating with his wife? But then you also knew that the big guy was abusive to his wife. And, then you don't know who to root for. So then you watch, or maybe you don't watch because you just lose interest. And that's sort of what happens here. It all just works so much better when you know who to support and who not to support. And it can be split. It can be like John Cena versus The Rock, where to some people, Rock's the babyface, Cena's the heel, the other people, but at least they all consistently know who they're rooting for. And they know why they're rooting for them. And that's why Shades of Grey, it may be great in films, maybe great in books. Some of my favourite characters are these sort of morally ambiguous characters. When you read it and you're like, this is really fascinating insight into the human psyche. But that's not a very loud, vociferous response at a wrestling event, and that is why it doesn't work. Alright, that was one long-ass segment. But like I say, this is the show for the thinking man, for the thinking fan. But if that was a bit too in-depth for your liking, maybe I was a bit too repetitive, let me know, because this is still a work in progress, and I really, really want to hear your feedback. But if you're with me, then stay tuned and listen to the next segment, because I'm going to go in depth about the Bootista problem. and why Batista just won't get over with his current character as a babyface in this day and or age. Thanks for listening. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, at the end of the last segment, or a few seconds ago, depending on how you're listening, I said that I was going to go in depth about the Bootista issue. Well, that's just the beauty of a pre-taped show, because you never know what's going to change, what's going to be edited out, and that's what makes it such a must-see or must-hear format. Because since I last spoke, they actually have completely turned Batista heel. That was on the most recent SmackDown edition. So I'm going to touch on that, but it doesn't really matter so much now. So instead, I'm going to focus on my next topic, which is people power. And I don't mean John Laurinaitis people power, I mean actual people power. But first, regarding Batista. You know, it's a fascinating time we're in the midst of right now as wrestling fans. And that's because it's a time of transition. Things are changing, and the evidence of that is deafening. And there's no finer example than Batista's failed return. At least failed so far, up until his heel turn. And there's got to be a lot of people, certainly including Batista himself, wondering, what gives? Why do people hate me so much? And to me, I think it's obvious. I think it's clear to anybody who's really been engrossed in the WWE of late, of 2012, 2013, early 2014, and seeing what's been resonating with the people, who they've been supporting, who they've been against. And so the simple answer is, he's just not likable. In his character, up until the heel turn, there's just nothing endearing about him. If you take a look at Daniel Bryan, and here's a guy who the WWE was not pushing to be this fan hero, and yet he gained this support that has been unparalleled. And this is because he's been naturally endearing. He's got this list of qualities that people just like in him. And Batista is the polar opposite of every one of them. So if you take a look at Daniel Bryan, he's unassuming. And that is normally not a good thing for a wrestler. But in his case, it makes him seem down to earth. He seems like a real person. He doesn't seem so phony. He doesn't seem so full of himself. He's a hard worker. And I'm not saying that Batista is not a hard worker, but I'm saying that Daniel Bryan worked for every single thing he got. At no point was he handpicked for a damn thing. He fought every inch of the way. Daniel Bryan is also an amazing wrestler. He's one of the best wrestlers of our time. He's also completely substance over style. Now, admittedly, he has his catchphrase, and, you know, I'm not going to say that's not a big part of his character and his success, because it absolutely is. But it all comes down to what happens in the ring. You know, the crowd are always into his matches. They're always into the high points of his matches, the turning points, even just when he's locking in moves, you know, real technical wrestling holds. The crowd love it. It's about the substance. It's not just about some cool factor. With Daniel Bryan, if you want somebody to understand his appeal, you've got to get them to watch one of his matches. You can't just say, listen to one of his promos or look at his entrance. They have to see what he's really about, and that is about wrestling. Also, he's humble. He's incredibly humble. I mean, he's humble on the microphone, on TV, but if you hear any of his interviews, you know, the guy's just so modest. You know, sometimes when you think, like, come on, man, like, you're experiencing this monumental success, and yeah, you don't need to be so modest about it all, but he is. And the final part of it is that he just seems like a nice guy. And here's what I find so interesting, because in 2014 and in 2013, that is something that people really want to support, that people want to cheer loudly for. But that wasn't always the case. See, Batista is from a different era. You use the term era and it makes you think of lifetimes, you know, different ages. But in wrestling, it's all compressed. It's really short. 10 years is a huge, huge difference in wrestling. And Batista, I guess 10 years ago, in 2004, by that time, that was when he was becoming huge. He had the Evolution storyline, and that's when he really broke out. Now, I actually was taking a hiatus over those years from around 2003 all the way through to around 2009. So when I came back, that was when Batista was getting ready to leave, and that's when he was playing his heel character. And I didn't see much of that, but I liked what I did see. And I think that has worked against him quite heavily, because that taste was still in my mouth when he came back, to me, he had that look about him. So all those traits that I listed of Daniel Bryan, let's now look at Batista. Batista is style over substance. He's the direct opposite. He's a musclehead. You know, this guy is about the look. I know he is, how do you say, not slimmed down, but he's dropped a lot of that bulk, certainly. But it's still, I mean, look at the way he parades himself. You know, he's very flashy. He's very, look at me. The day he came back, a lot of people were fixating even on his dress sense, his style. I wasn't bothered by the way he dressed as such, but the way he carried himself. And he had that little, I don't know what you call it, that jacket thing, and he unzips it and he's got no top underneath and he's showing off his abs and his pecs. He felt really vain. He felt absolutely the opposite of the humble Daniel Bryan. And he might be humble in real life, but as far as how he's presenting himself on TV, he came across as arrogant. He came across as aloof, as the coolest guy in the room, and he knows he's the coolest guy in the room, and he's going to let everybody else know about it as well. So he puts himself across like a movie star, and per his television character least, you know, he thinks he is a movie star. And so he has this larger-than-life feel, or at least he should do. He's doing everything seemingly right to have that larger-than-life feel, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe we just don't like that larger-than-life feel right now. I mean, in a sort of supernatural Undertaker kind of way, maybe a bit different. But if you look at CM Punk, if you look at Daniel Bryan, a lot of the criticisms has been, you wouldn't know that they're a wrestler. Well, maybe people like that now. It certainly seems like they do. It makes them more relatable. Batista is not in any way relatable. And did I mention that he's not a great wrestler? He's not awful. If we're talking wrestling as in the complete product, not just locking in holds, but the complete match product. He's not that bad, but he's not great. He's certainly no Daniel Bryan and no CM Punk. And there's this real appreciation for that these days, which I love. I absolutely love that. And I mentioned quite flippantly at the start that sports entertainment and professional wrestling are the same thing. Well, that's why, because professional wrestling is entertaining. When you put on a brilliant match, everybody's entertained by it. Not just for hardcore internet fans, but all the fans in the building, because that's what they came for. We've been really programmed to think that entertainment has to be the quirky skits and things like that, and they've got their place in wrestling, but wrestling is entertaining, and more people are really expressing their love of that, and Batista just can't bring that in the way that your Daniel Bryan, your Antonio Cesaro, just call me Cesaro, okay, and your CM Punks can bring that. So when you put it all together like some mad Frankenstein, you know what JBL likes to say, if you were to build a sports entertainer from the ground up, Michael, it would look like Randy Orton. Well, I think if you were to build a heel in 2014 from the ground up, it would be Batista. It would be the returning babyface Batista. And so they've recognized it. I mean, it's not like they had to analyze it by themselves. They had the crowd telling them, and they've turned him heel. So I think only good things can come of this. I will say that when I watched the promo on SmackDown, I don't think he needs the cheap heat. I really don't. Well, I know he doesn't need the cheap heat because, you know, the heat is scalding already. So I don't think he really needs to be insulting the fans. I like if he's going to be saying how he's going to destroy all their heroes. I like that because that's sort of the feeling anyway. But, well, I think this is WWE's lack of subtlety when it comes to heels and baby faces. And I'll address that in another segment. But just to wrap this all up, in another time, Batista would have been just fine. You take a look at The Rock. You take a look at his character when he first really skyrocketed. He was playing this arrogant heel. When he was so good at it that people just warmed to him. They thought, all right, this guy is so good at being cocky that I like that. And yeah, he actually you wanted to be like that, you know. He had that factor. And maybe Batista at one point had that, and maybe that's how people felt, but it's just not the time for that anymore. That actually will get you hated. And I really find that fascinating. It's like how the Hulk Hogan routine, at one point, the fans loved that. Oh, that's respectable. That's really admirable. And he had Kurt Angle in, I think it's 2000, when he first came into the WWF. And he did pretty much the same thing. And people hated it. And when you're in tune with that, that's when you're just right on the money. And I think, you know, money's the term because you're going to make more money. I don't know. I don't run a wrestling promotion. I just talk about it on the internet. But hey, I love it when they're in tune, and sometimes when they're not in tune, you've got to shout at them until they realize what's up. What's up? Come on, Maggle. When he says what's up, you say what's up. When he says use, we say oh, Maggle. All right, JBO, you sit your ass down. You sit your ass down. I'm glad you can make it anyway. And I know you and our truth are down like 4 flat tires. I know you're like Jay-Z and Beyonce or whatever, but you're listening to the show for the thinking man, for the thinking fan, if you will. And I know I said that I wasn't going to go in depth about Bootista, but yeah, I lied. I'm still going to give you what I said I was going to give you, and that's a little in-depth look at people power. People power! So I did touch on this somewhat in my video, my pilot episode of sorts, entitled The Rise of the American Dragon, about Daniel Bryan's slow rise to superstardom. But it's not just tied to Daniel Bryan. It's just the climate right now in the WWE, and it's amazing, it's fascinating, it's something that's really, really great to be a part of. It's not always enjoyable at all times, but it's always fascinating. And the reason I'm actually going to go in depth on this is because I'm still hearing people say that chanting and that cheering people or booing people that they want you to cheer is not going to make any difference, that it doesn't matter how loud our voice is, they're not going to listen, you can't change their booking, you can't force the hand of the WWE. And I just think, what have they been watching over this past year, over these past months? Since SummerSlam, especially since the Royal Rumble. There's people that are still saying that the only way to affect any sort of change, make a difference, is for us all just to stop watching. Well, if we all stopped watching, and by we, I mean those of us that are talking about it on the internet, the fans that are passionate enough that they're still going to want to discuss this after it goes off air. If we stopped watching, they wouldn't go out of business. They would still float along, and I think they'd do it quite comfortably because they've got this base audience. Largely, they've got the children, but they've also got the fans who are just going to turn up because it's something that they enjoy. It's just a bit of entertainment, even if they're not hugely, hugely passionately into the product. If WWE's in their area, they're going to go along. They're going to see it. And you've got people who maybe they just watch out of habit if it's on television. We're not going to be able to really affect their bottom line all that much. Now, we do make a difference because that sounds like, that we really are the 10%, as Eric Bischoff would say. Well, we're not. It's just that there aren't that many people that are going to be willing to stop watching. A lot of us passionate fans are part of that base audience because we just don't have the heart to stop because we love it. And I hear some people say, if you don't like it, just leave, the whole love it or leave it thing. I think that's incredibly foolish. Because if you really love something, then you want to see it improve because you know how good it can be. And you don't just want to abandon it and walk away. You want to do whatever you can to make it better. And that is what we're doing right now. I mean, how can you miss it? You look at Daniel Bryan. He would still be in the Wyatt family probably now if it wasn't for people power, if it wasn't for our voice being heard. And how can you not hear it when it's deafening? It's not just the people who are attending Raw. It's also those house shows. From every report, people really, really were yearning for Daniel Bryan to be Daniel Bryan, for them to be able to join in and do the yes chant. That's what a lot of them paid their money to come along and do. They see it on television. It looks exciting, it looks like fun, and that's what they wanted, and so that's what they got. We managed to get that changed. We managed to get Daniel Bryan where he is because of our support when he was not the person handpicked for that sort of fan support. So that's Exhibit A for a American Dragon. Then we have Exhibit B for Bootista, which I've already been through. And if people say, they're not going to listen to us, well, they have, because Batista is now heel. And how could they not? It's not just a case of, are they going to oblige us? Are they going to be kind enough to listen to us? Sometimes they really don't have much choice. I mean, are you going to put this guy out there week after week and on these pay-per-views or whatever we're going to call them these days when he is being booed out of the building? Sometimes, one why they didn't even have him go in front of the crowd. They just had him backstage because they knew what the reaction was going to be. I don't blame people for being so disheartened into thinking that we really do have no power at all, that Vince McMahon's will is his will and nothing's going to sway that. But that's just not the case. That's just not how wrestling works, whether they want it to work that way or not. What can you do when your show is being just littered by these boos and it's embarrassing? It's got to be embarrassing for them to put these shows out and have it go that way. I mean, when it comes down to it, they've still got to be able to tell a story and the narrative is completely destroyed. Imagine if you're a new fan and you're tuning in. What the hell are you going to think? How are you going to know what's going on? And you think they want that? To not be able to actually get any more new fans? Just to have the audience that they've got? No, of course not. They need the new fans. They need these new people to start watching and think, yeah, I'm enjoying this. I'm into this. I wanna become part of this. See, we're essentially holding them at ransom. And it's very important to understand who this we is. Because while it started out as the most hardcore fans and the passionate internet fans, it's spread. It's spread because it's now something that other people can join in with. And maybe they're actually having to think about it and thinking, you know what, these guys have got a point. Daniel Bryan should be positioned in this top spot because it's not just them who loves him, we love him as well. One way I've heard this framed is this as though the crowds have become self-aware. And I love that because that's how it feels to me. It feels as though all these people have realised, hang on a minute, we actually have a lot of power here. We don't just have to sit there and mumble and grumble to each other. We can actually make our voice so loud that they have to listen to it. And when has this happened before? The naysayers and the doubters who say, look, it's not going to happen, it's not going to work. What are they basing this on? Because when has this ever happened? I've heard about the We Want Flair chants those days after Ric Flair left WCW to go to the WWF, and there was a huge outcry for him at every WCW event. And I don't know exactly the time scale, but he eventually went back to WCW, of course. But when has this happened within the WWF that you've just had this many disgruntled fans that are, I don't really like the term hijack, because I feel that they're only doing what their right is to do, and that's just to cheer who they want and to state their opinion. And how many times has WWE been telling us this? You have the right to express your opinion. Well, sorry, but that's what they're doing now. And to chant the name of the people they want. And that does bring me to one thing. Because we have great power. But with great power comes enormous responsibility. And if I butchered that phrase, it's because I'm not much of a comic book fan. But yeah, the random chants, look, sometimes as a sort of act of protest, it can be brilliant. But if you're going to protest, you need to be actually having a clear vision of what you're protesting. So you're chanting it when they give us the Randy Orton versus Sheamus match because it's tired and it's unimaginative, and they're not taking any risks and just thinking, well, we're going to go strike while the iron's hot. No, they're just sticking with their status quo because they think it's easy money. And so if you want to chant for Randy Savage, then great, you do that, and it obviously gets under Randy Orton's skin. I can be on board with that. But sometimes it just feels too much like people, they just want to be hipsters, they just want to try to feel edgy. They want to copycat what other crowds have done when other crowds have done it with more of a purpose. And so sometimes when they're chanting things during great matches, I don't chant it during great matches and with fresh competitors. What's the point in doing that? It's like the people chant Husky Harris at Bray Wyatt. When you go to the cinema, do you do that as well? He used to be a different character in another film. They might as well be chanting, we hate immersion. So, no, I'm not on board with that. And I don't think it's going to be prominent enough to actually destroy this movement. And I don't mean this silly corporate yes movement, but this people power movement. I don't think it's going to be enough to derail it, but it can make us look like fools. It can make us look like we just want to, screw up the show just for the sake of putting ourselves over.
But I'm willing to put that down to growing pains. We've learned how to talk, we've discovered we have a voice, and now we're just getting to grips of how to use it. Which brings me on to Exhibit CM Punk. Well, they say that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And there's no clearer evidence of this than the whole CM Punk fiasco since he left. Since he took his proverbial ball and went home with it. I'm not actually going to talk about the merits of chanting CM Punk. Because the thing is, he left of his own accord. He was the guy who decided he'd had enough. And it wasn't as though he'd had enough of being mistreated either. Obviously, I don't know all of the details, only he does right now, but it's not like they forced him out. So if you're chanting it to show your respect, then yeah, sure, do that. But it feels to me like it's some sort of protest. Like they're saying, yeah, you hear that, Vince? CM Punk, that's what we want. Well, that's actually what Vince wants as well. What I'm going to talk about is the upcoming Raw in Chicago. And I'm recording this on Saturday, the Saturday before that Raw. Because I don't know of any event in the past. Oh, actually, I guess I do. You could say ECW, the second one night stand, which is a silly concept in itself, of course. But yeah, ECW in 2006, and to a lesser extent, the first Bootista
incident, which was when the WWE ECW went back to the Hammerstein Ballroom, and the main event was Big Show versus Batista. And that was fun to watch for exactly the same reason that Monday Night in Chicago is going to be fun to watch. But this is on such a larger scale. And this is where our power is really coming into play. And everyone's fascinated to see how they're going to handle it. And as I say, this is unprecedented. Has not happened before. You know, in such close proximity, we had Daniel Bryan and his mistreatment, both in the storyline and seemingly in reality, and how that galvanized fans, and then CM Punk walk in and the outcry for him. It's just this, what I love about it is there's this spirit of rebellion. It's like there's a revolution in here, and again, it's a sign of the times. I think that, you know, you've got the Occupy movements, you've got this whole 1% versus the 99%, and it's just part of our culture right now. And I love the way this is all coming together. And Monday night, to me, it's the people versus the giant corporate machine that has become too old, too clunky for its own good. And when I say too old, yeah, there's implications of Vince McMahon. But it's not just him and his age. It's also the company at large. And it is so large. It's this corporate monster now. And it seems to be so preoccupied with its image and with its corporate sponsors that the fans who make all of it possible, it seems like they're just not being represented so much anymore. That there's this lack of willingness to adapt to the times, to the climate, you know, to just go with the flow on certain things. And it leaves the fans feeling disenfranchised, and it builds, but then eventually that pressure just creates a rebellion, and it is glorious. And maybe they decide to weather the storm on Monday night in Chicago, but in WrestleMania? That's what it's coming down to this year. Batista versus Randy Orton, they can't put it on last. You want to say we can't affect change? That if we couldn't affect change, that would be going on last regardless. But they don't want their flagship show, the 30th WrestleMania of all things, to just be absolutely shat on.
So in summation, please, don't listen to those naysayers who say that our voice means nothing, that we can't make anything change, because the change is right there in front of our eyes right now. If we did what they're counseling us to do and we just stopped watching and we stopped showing up, there would still be enough people watching and enough people showing up for them to float along and stay in business. But think of the product they'd be putting out. I mean, where would Daniel Bryan be on that card? Where would Cesaro be on that card? Where would Batista be? I think we know where he would be. Well, he'd be on top of the world, looking down on creation. And the only explanation that I can see is that they would no longer have that pressure from the fans. So why would they then cave to this pressure? Why would they now cave to this outcry that's no longer there? When they've got these docile fans who are still going to turn up and they're still going to pay the money. Well, then suddenly we'd start seeing what we want when we're now no longer in the picture. It just doesn't make sense. And I say that the real proof is in the pudding. I don't understand that metaphor, but the pudding is on our screens every week. And watch on Monday, watch in Chicago, and I don't know how to finish that metaphor. The pudding is going to be delicious and very fun to eat. Well, I've enjoyed this. Have you enjoyed this? Of course you have, because you're smarter than the average fan. You're the thinking fan. Give yourself a round of applause. I love you guys so much. I'm just here to entertain you. I do it all for you, the people. Doesn't it just make you sick when they pander to you like that? We can see straight through it, can't we? I'm doing it again. But this is why next week I'm going to be looking at WWE's apparent inability to make likable baby faces. Baby faces that don't make you want to puke. And to a lesser extent, credible heels. But unlike the WWE of today, I am flexible. So if something comes up and changes all of that, well, then I might just have to go with something else. So until next time, I've been your host, the self-proclaimed IWC champion of the world, Rick, don't call me violent, David. And although my reasons are less than altruistic, I would really like to be doing this show for more than 1 or 2 people. So hey, do me a solid, give it a like if you like it, subscribe to my Rick and Wrestling channel, and if you're so fortunate as to have a friend, well, tell them about it. And if you have 2 friends, well, lucky you, tell them too. Much love, peace out, safe journey home, take care, bye bye.
No, they're saying
Bootista.
Are you saying boo or
Bootista.
I was saying
Bootista. Deal with it.
My name is Mr. John Laurinaitis. It's not Laurinaitis. I don't know why you keep saying that. And I would like for everybody here to subscribe to Rock and Wrestling, to RiC and Wrestling. Just click subscribe. People power.